Hello and welcome to Reflections in Veterinary Education. This week or this month, I guess we do these monthly, is going to be a topic. And Catherine and Eric don't know what the topic is yet. I actually I don't know either. No, we have a really long list. So I went back because I was trying to think of things and I was like, we have a really long list of things to go through. And it's hard to pick one. I was like, oh, that'd be good. Oh, that'd be good. I'm going to kind of maybe combine two. We'll see where it goes. But two that came up that I think are different and not topics we've really touched on this show yet is the question about tenure. What is it meant to be? And I think it could nicely kind of blend into what is promotion and tenure, like what does that look like for folks with an emphasis in education? So I think those could nicely blend. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, because again, I think that's a little different than any topic we've had so far. I certainly have thoughts about all of these things, and I'm curious to hear, because I don't think I haven't spoken with either of you about your thoughts on tenure.
Tenure is useless and broken and pointless in veterinary medicine.
Don't hold back, Eric.
I've been saying this for years, at least in clinical medicine. You know how many people we have apply to jobs in clinical medicine? 0 to 2.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We're irreplaceable.
Yeah.
And guess what? If you sexually assault a student, I don't care if you got tenure. They're going to fire you anyways.
They better.
It's utterly meaningless.
Well, they should, but they don't always. So I will put that out there.
Yeah.
Tenure, it's interesting. Like when you first, you don't grow up as a child learning what tenure is, right? Like that's not, nobody's like, oh yeah.
No, so actually, this is, actually I have an aside on this. You know how the Brits have, they understand that there are classes of, people like in society. But my wife and I are both what we call the academic class. And I think it is a thing because both of my parents had graduate degrees. They had a fair amount of experience in academia. My wife's parents both have graduate degrees. Her father taught in academia. And so, no, I totally knew what tenure was when I was in junior high.
I did not.
I did not.
No. Yeah, I had no idea. It was a long time, far into, my training. I don't even know when I first learned about it. But I do remember my initial thoughts about being I don't like this. What do you mean you get to a certain point and then these people can't be fired? That's how it was, my first exposure to it was yeah. You work for 7 years really hard. And then you're good. You're good forever. And I was like, that really? That's all it is. And so then you look into it. Well, some people do. I'm a nerd. So I looked into it and was like, what is this really? Or where did it come from? And originally it actually, made some sense, I think. So I'll share with you what my understanding, maybe you guys have different understandings or have heard different things. So I'll be curious because again, none of us prepared for this. So we'll see. You're going to be like, no, that's totally wrong, Bobby. But my understanding is tenure was originally developed for academics 100 years ago, roughly, in some of those higher education institutions, where it was you want academic freedom. So once you have earned your spot, you've researched these things, you've got some grants, whatever their criteria were, you get to research whatever you want. If you want to research some rare butterfly that nobody is going to care about but you have earned the right to do that. The university is not going to tell you what you can research, or if you want to do something controversial or you want to teach courses that are outside, the university is not going to be able to tell you no, because you've proven yourself to be successful in X, Y, and Z, and we're going to give you that academic freedom. And I was like, that's actually kind of cool that the university is saying, do this, do this for us for, kind of pay your dues, so to speak, prove that you have the chops to do whatever you want to do well. And then we're going to let you pick what you want. I think that makes sense. I don't think it makes sense anymore. It's certainly not, like you said, in veterinary medicine. I also am not sure it's needed anywhere else. I don't know that academic freedom is like a huge problem. I don't know anybody who's like pre-tenure or non-tenured that somebody's coming along and be like, you will research this. This is what you will do. Maybe you get told like you're going to teach this introductory course in your field, but like, I feel like, I don't know. I think if you're tenured, they should be able to tell you that, hey, we need somebody to teach this introductory. Like, I don't know. It's like you have this right of refusal now. Like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to serve on that committee. No, I'm not going to do this. Like, meh, I'm just going to earn my paycheck. And not everybody with tenure treats it that way, obviously, but some
A
do.
lot of people do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I am much more of a geek than you, because during my dissertation, this actually came up as one of the issues when I was doing my interviews for my dissertation. It actually ended up being one of the themes in my dissertation. And so I had to do some research into tenure. And you are right, it was almost exactly 100 years ago. I think it was 1922 when tenure first became a thing at the first institutions. And so what I will say is, and I'm fond of saying this about other things too, right? Like, just like Marxism, tenure in theory sounds like a great thing. The problem is that people are involved, and so it gets all screwed up and it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. So tenure in theory was created to provide equal protections for people who wanted to teach, do research, and do service. So 33% teaching, 33% service, 33% research, or whatever it is I didn't just say. So those three pillars of tenure were the things. And they were all
equally.
Right. So they were all supposed to be equally important when you were going up for tenure in your position. So the problem with tenure now is that it has become bastardized, and it has evolved into a situation where he who makes the most money or she who makes the most money gets tenured. Doesn't matter if you teach well. It doesn't matter what your service looks like. All that matters is if you are personally, individually recognized and whether you bring money into an institution. And now that's not solely because of the academic institution. That's partly because of external pressures involved with decreasing funding and all those other things. But I think that tenure as a theory is a really good thing, because it's supposed to protect you as an instructor and a teacher from being attacked because you have different views about things, or because you have views that maybe aren't as popular or that maybe are controversial. So things like critical race theory, technically, if you have tenure, you should be protected if you choose to teach that in the classroom. At least at the higher institution level. Same thing with research, just as you described, Bobby. And then service, which is the thing we all sort of just poo-poo service. But for many of us who are in academia, we recognize that even though our service FTE is 10%, which is pretty standard, our service oftentimes far exceeds that amount. Yeah. So I personally think that tenure has a place. I think that tenure needs to go back to its roots. And I think that tenure needs to be executed in a way that was intended, not in the way that it's evolved to become. I also think that there need to be some protections for people, or some, I don't know, some way of determining, or some rubric or something that determines whether or not somebody who's post-tenure, because they do like post-tenure reviews and things like that, but they're not essentially gonna fire you unless, as Eric pointed out, you like sexually assault someone, in which case, it doesn't really matter if you have tenure, hopefully, or kill someone. But it has to be pretty egregious for you to do that. And I don't think that that's necessarily right either, right? Like, you shouldn't be able to just say, oh, I've worked for 7 or 10 or 15 years. I've paid my dues. Now I can just sit on my, arse and not do anything and just publish papers by making my little graduate students wrote papers and put my name on it. Like, I don't agree with that at all.
So, Catherine, can you clarify one thing for me? So you were saying originally tenure was like kind of broken into thirds between. Does that mean each individual is expected to spend roughly a third of their time, or like that is equally prioritized as a whole at the university? So if one individual is like, yeah, I want to do mostly teaching and a little bit of this other thing, or, like, how does that work?
Yeah, the second one. So they should be equally weighted and protected as someone's going up for tenure. So if you're an 80% instructor and a 10% service and a 10% research, then you should get tenure based on the strength of your teaching, not deny tenure because you're not bringing in research dollars.
Yeah. That is a system that I'd be more open to. That is 100% not what it is. Like we have tenure tracks now, right? Like that's the whole thing. Like, oh, do you want to be able to get tenure? No, I don't actually care with the way the system works. I've never felt the need to get tenure for job security. And that's because of what tenure is at most places, like, yep, you need to bring in research dollars, and the kind of research and the amount of research that I've always wanted to do doesn't fit with that. So it was just never anything I cared about. But it's always really annoyed me that the universities are saying we value this higher than this.
Yeah.
And because there is no other way to interpret that.
Well, and I think if it was executed in the original intent, like we've been discussing, Eric, then the idea of it being relevant for veterinary medicine would still exist, right? Because those clinical track folks would essentially be teaching, and they would be allowed to go up for tenure based on the strength of their clinical skills in teaching. And those folks who are research people would be able to go up on the strength of their research. And there would be separate sort of rubrics for each of those things. And so in that case, it would make sense. The other thing I will say is I was talking, I think it was Laura, one of our department heads. I think she was the one I was having the conversation with. And we were talking about tenure. Anyway, it was somebody at Virginia Tech. And they were, I guess, talking to a potential candidate they were trying to bring on. And the candidate was like, well, I really want a tenure track position because it's more secure, right? I have more security. And this individual was like, you understand that's actually a fallacy, right? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And they're like, well, listen, in 5 years, if you don't go up for tenure and get tenure, you're out. I mean, you have no job security, and I can't do anything to protect you. And in that 5 years, it's going to be really hard for you to get tenure based on X, Y, and Z. If you're a non-tenure position and you're demonstrating that you have value and you continue to get your contract renewed, you have just as much and potentially more job security, particularly in a veterinary position, because especially if you're clinical, because as Eric has pointed out, there are not enough clinicians. And so this person had to sort of dispel some of the myths that are associated with being tenure and having that, that security of job. Because in reality, I've seen people not get tenure and they are out. I mean, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
So.
I've seen that too. People who kind of knew they weren't going to get tenure, after that, they're like, yeah, I think I'm going to move on to something else.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that initial pressure, but I think the idea, people come in and they see people who are tenured, and they're like, yeah, I want that life. Because definitely I have worked with some people who are tenured and they're amazing, and they continue to be involved and engaged, and they're on committees and they're heading up this, and they're still, producing research, and they're super supportive of their grad students and their residents. And then there are those who are like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Yeah, no, you can't make and nothing happens, right? So unless something egregious or illegal is happening, they're just kind of allowed to coast along, and sometimes they're just disruptive, right? Like they're just preventing other people from doing what they want. I'm like, you are like an anti-tenure person, like you are preventing other people from their academic. But they feel protected, and then oftentimes, at least from the outside looking in, they are protected, like they're allowed continue in that vein, and it's frustrating.
And so I've had experience with that individual that's sort of keeping that. It's part of the reason I didn't pursue what I really wanted to pursue or thought I wanted to pursue, which was a PhD in wildlife conservation, because of my experience with that. But then the other side of that is I hesitate to call them colleagues because they are people that I don't want to be associated with, but I've seen them who they are fully tenured, and they use that power and they walk that line to the point where they do things that are absolutely 100% inappropriate, but they aren't egregious enough for them to be dismissed from, their position. And it's things like sexual harassment, it's things like racism, it's things like, things like that, homophobia. But they get away with it because they're tenured. And so that part, I really struggle with that, because that's.
I want to push back on that a little bit, because I would argue, if there is a in-demand specialist, let's say radiology, if you're a radiologist and you express some racism or some homophobia or maybe even sexual assault, are they going to fire you? I would argue no.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. I agree. Yeah.
Regardless of if you're tenured or not.
Agreed. And I've seen in that's. Agree. And I've seen that in public health, for example. That's one of the people that I routinely worked with was a full professor. He was tenured, and he definitely sexually harassed students and made inappropriate comments, and knew that he was never going to get fired. He just knew it. And public health professors are not irreplaceable. They're not a dime a dozen, but they're not irreplaceable. but this individual brought millions of dollars of money into the institution, had a great reputation, and had basically put the fear of whatever deity you want to call it into the students. And the students knew that if they said anything, that their careers were over before they started. And that's where tenure to me becomes a weapon rather than what it's supposed to be, which is a tool to provide you. It's protecting you in the wrong way.
You're right, Eric. You don't have to have tenure to have that protection, especially in vet med.
Yeah.
Not the only thing, but I will, I don't know.
But I think that there are places that won't fly. And I think there are places, and maybe they're not all academic. I certainly know there are some private places out there that if you were that kind of person, it wouldn't matter how quote unquote valuable your specialty was. They don't want that kind of culture.
Right,
it's
culture.
rare, but they don't want that kind of culture and they will let you go. So, but yeah, it's unfortunately that's the exception, not the rule. So I do agree with you there, unfortunately.
The intellectual freedom thing, I remember it was relatively shortly after 9/11. There was a college professor in Colorado who basically said, we brought this on ourselves. You guys, like all of our foreign policy resulted in this outcome. Tenured professor fired.
Yeah.
And so like when I heard that story, I was like, okay, so tenure's not even achieving one of its primary stated goals, which is to allow you to express what you believe to be academically useful.
Right.
Yeah. To promote that, like, let's have a conversation.
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point, right? Like if I'm not allowed to say these things, that we don't advance, we don't push the envelope. Right. Now, you might say this is terrible. And, but if you go through and that professor gets repeatedly, bad reviews from students and he doesn't allow us to give our, he's only saying his side and doesn't allow us to disagree. That's a different thing. But just saying, oh, you expressed a view we don't like, you're out. You're right. That is not what tenure is meant to be. That's the opposite. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I guess back to your original comment, Bobby, that, how does this play into veterinary education and teaching and that kind of thing? I mean, I think I agree with Eric in that it's really worthless in veterinary medicine as it is now and as it's executed now. If it was to go back to that sort of original intent, I think that it would probably be very worthwhile. I think there are places, I mean, Bobby, I think you were promoted on the strength of your teaching, right? So there are places that are increasingly recognizing that. And I will say, as a plug for AVE, right, Academy of Veterinary Educators, that's, I think, one of the things, at least in my mind, maybe Eric, you don't agree, but that we sort of wanted to bring something that had some legitimate weight to it so that people who did have, designs on teaching and potentially becoming promoted and or tenured even at some places, they could say, listen, I have this credential that recognizes me as being an expert and it should carry some weight because it's now backed by AAVMC and it has 550 people who support this. And this is a legitimate thing that I had to go through a really rigorous process to prove. And it's external to my organization. So it's not my friends who are doing this. It's not letters of recommendation, right? It's like a legitimate process. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a sea change with that and the value that teaching brings and how that should be recognized. I don't know that it's necessarily going to get us tenure, but in some places it does.
Things are definitely, I've even just, in the time I've been in veterinary, like academic medicine, I've seen a change in the perceptions of like how those other buckets are valued besides bringing in research dollars. There's definitely been a change, maybe a little bit back to the original intent of tenure. I think my issue where we currently are with tenure, it either needs to be just gotten rid of completely, just do away with it, or it needs to be overhauled where everybody has access to it.
Yeah, agreed.
Because again, I got promoted on, I was able to get promoted, but it's like promotion / tenure. So guess what? I'm still like a second class faculty. Like that's how it's communicated. And I don't feel that from like my direct supervisors, my department head, like the people, like I don't feel that, but that's what the university is saying. Like you can't tell me that we have difference, it's separate but equal. Is that like what I'm trying to say here? No, it's a different system, but we value you all equally. No, you do not.
And I basically had like a dean at a previous institution say that to me, right? So I was negotiating because I had been offered another job and I was trying to decide. And he basically said, well, listen, I can offer you this amount of dollar raise, but if you were on tenure track, I could offer you more, but you're not. So, and I mean, I knew that was the case. It wasn't as if he was telling me anything that surprised me. But the thing that was so frustrating was that there was this whole attitude of, no, our tenure faculty and our non-tenure faculty are equally important, and we value everybody.
No, literally, you do not.
So this is, I think that this is actually highly institution dependent. Like, one of the reasons I was at UGA for so long is that they didn't embrace the ivory tower mentality. I was helping someone negotiate for a position at Penn, and they were talking about, should I go tenure track, clinical track? It's like, I mean, it doesn't really make that much difference. And the salary lines at Penn for a full professor are insane.
I'm
They
sure.
are so high for a full tenured professor.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what in the world? Like, I've never experienced that before in my academic career, the vast disparity between full tenured professor and anyone else. Like, at a lot of institutions, like at Georgia, the new assistant profs were out earning the full tenured profs, So I do think that it is highly institution dependent. And, to your second class citizen thing, I don't think I could tell you here at Auburn who is a tenure track and who's clinical track. No idea.
Well, that's good.
The only difference it makes is what P&T like things you participate in.
Yeah.
And it was that way at TCU when I was at TCU. TCU isn't a very high research institution. It's a doctoral granting institution. But they actually call everybody professor, regardless of whether you're an assistant, an associate, or a full, and they don't indicate in any way whether you're tenure track or not. It's just you're professor such and such, and it doesn't matter where you are on that ladder, whether you're 1 year in or you're 20 years in. And so there is sort of this level of equity. I don't know what the pay scale is because it's a private institution. I didn't actually work for them. And in many ways, that was so nice because it was like going to a school where you wear uniforms, right? There was no disparity between the people who could wear really, really expensive clothes versus who didn't have enough money for shoes, because everybody wore the same thing. And it just.
And on the promotion and tenure, perspective, again, I think that's going to be highly institution dependent. So at Georgia, they count teaching publications as equal to any other peer-reviewed research publication when you go up for promotion and tenure. So you have to have usually 10 pubs for going up for associate prof. You could have 10 education-related publications and be considered just as strongly as someone who has 10 research-oriented publications. And while they like extramural funding, the understanding, at least for clinicians, is like, you're making money being in the clinic. Like, you're not expected to bring in extramural funding. So I honestly have a very strong bias against ivory tower universities. And there's a few of them in veterinary medicine, and they bug me.
Yeah. I do think things are changing, though. I think they're one, as you said, Eric, like there's a need for clinicians, for folks to work in the clinics and the hospital. And I don't know if that's entirely what's driving it, or if it's really just that you have people for a long time who wanted to do that. Like, I want to spend time in the clinic, or I want to spend time in the classroom. And while I like research, I don't necessarily want to spend the entirety of my time in a lab or writing grants. And there's room for all of us. That's the thing for me, is like, as an individual, like, do any of us, like, there's probably a few of these people out there, but they're, in my opinion, fairly few and far between, those people who are like amazing at clinical service, amazing at teaching, and amazing at research. And if those people exist, it was probably at different points in their career, right? At one time, you were probably not excelling at all three of those things, because that's just not how it works. But as an institution, we can have some people who are excelling at this and some people who are excelling at that. And again, and maybe you want to be really good at two of those things. That is probably doable. And honestly, like, a nice balance to have a couple, different things that you do. And I just think it just makes us as a group, as a team, stronger if we say, hey, you're really good at this, and maybe you don't love this other thing so much, and that's okay, because we have other people who do. And we just need to be strategic about who we are hiring on our teams to say, we have a gap over here. We need to recruit somebody who's like really interested in this particular thing, rather than expecting each individual to check all of the boxes. I just think that's unrealistic. And I think it is changing. I agree with you, Eric. Not everywhere. Some places are coming to that slower than others. But it is interesting. And I've had similar experience to kind of what Catherine was saying. When you're going between institutions, this is where it gets really tricky. Because they're like, oh yeah, that's great what you were doing, but yeah, that doesn't fly here. So you're actually, if you want to move to here, you're actually going to get demoted and have to go through our process again. And other places were like, oh wow, you're way ahead of the game. Yeah, we would actually just promote you. You wouldn't even have to go through the promotion process. And I'm just like, what is happening? So the fact so institution dependent is also really tricky. You know, if you want to stay there forever, I suppose it doesn't matter. But like, I actually think it's good if people move around and share ideas. But it's hard.
It's pretty unusual for tenured folks to move, actually, too. Once they get tenure, oftentimes they just sort of stay. And I think that sort of contributes to some stagnation and some, you know, sort of narrowing of the thought processes. And so, yeah, I 100% agree with you, Eric, that it is institution dependent. I have a good colleague and friend who is at an institution in North America, vet school at North America. And she is tenured there based on her teaching. And she has been promoted. She, you know, looked for another job and got a job offer from another institution that is definitely more research dependent. And she was basically told, sorry, you don't qualify for tenure at our institution. And they really wanted her, but she was like, why would I leave a tenured position to go someplace that doesn't think that what I've done is valuable enough to be tenured, right? And so she didn't go. And that was a really hard decision for her because it was an institution that she really respected and that she really enjoyed the people. So yeah, I mean, I guess everything's going to be institution dependent, and it makes it hard because you kind of want it to be the same everywhere, but then how boring would life be if everything was the same everywhere and, you know, all the same people would be competing for the same positions at every place and it would just be a pain in the butt. But I definitely think there needs to be some adjustment to, I mean, I think Virginia Tech is probably as much of an ivory tower institution in many ways as any other institution I've been in, but I see that the vet school is actually really working hard to evolve and make strides and be very intentional about, okay, well, how can we make sure that our clinical faculty and that our teaching faculty and that our research faculty are feeling as if they're truly valued and do have that path to tenure and to promotion. So that I definitely see changing here. So I think it's slow, but it's getting there. And I mean, I do think that Virginia Tech is much better than a lot of places. It's still not quite maybe where Georgia is, but it's certainly moving in that direction.
I think you do a pretty good job. But yeah, I had a similar, you know, personally had a scenario where I had gone through promotion at Florida. And as you said, like largely based on my teaching portfolio, teaching in clinics, those were the two. I had some research, but that's what I emphasized in my packet. And let me tell you, that process is a pain in the butt.
Yeah, it is.
The year I went up for promotion was like my least productive year because I was spending all this time like trying to I was like, we need to fix this system. But so I got promoted, which was good because if I hadn't, I told my husband, I was like, if I don't get promoted in this, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do. Like I really don't. So luckily I did, but then I had applied to a couple other places and one of them made an offer, but I was a clinical associate professor and their offer was going to bump me back down to clinical assistant. And they were like, yeah. And then in a couple of years, I was like, you want me to go through the process again? Yeah, that's never going to happen.
What was the rush? I have not heard of that, of going down a rank. That is unusual.
Like this was not a 10 line, but now maybe I could have pushed back and, you know, but there were other things with the offer that I was just like, meh. And I think, yeah, there were just some other issues, but I was just like, oh, it's like you guys don't really want me to come here.
Right.
Literally the year before had gone through this process. I would say if the packet, and I've given you my CV, and actually I think I even shared with them my promotion dossier that I used at Florida. Obviously it's a different system, but if you're saying what I've been doing for the past 7 years wouldn't get promotion at your institution, this isn't going to work. You want me to do? Like I've been working my butt off and I think I've been doing a pretty good job. Florida thought I was doing a pretty good job. So that definitely put a huge damper on that offer and I didn't go there. But there was another place before I'd gotten my promotion. They were like, yep, we will hire you in at the associate level. Like I would skip that, which in retrospect, I probably should have done that. But yeah, I've
definitely heard about going that direction, like getting a new job and getting a promotion. I've never heard getting a demotion. That is
Yep.
That is, I like, who would,
Why would you
yeah,
even offer the job?
yeah, like I've been a department chair. Why would I make that offer? Like,
Yeah.
what would go on in my head to do that?
That was honestly my response. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't see this working out. Like, I sort of interpreted that as, I don't really, like, they're making the offer, but I don't think they actually really want me to come
Yeah.
here.
So
I mean, but why would you
Catherine-
even go through that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was,
Catherine, we've both worked at private teaching oriented schools, and I'm
Mhm.
curious what your experience was. My experience was that they were more than happy to promote people based on their teaching.
Mhm.
And their research in teaching was, the primary difference, I think, for the tenure track and clinical track was the ones that did tenure track, did more research. But if your research was teaching, you were golden.
Yeah. So LMU actually doesn't have any tenure lines at all.
Oh.
It's a non-tenure track school. It's strictly based on teaching, which I, in many ways, think is fantastic. The challenge at that vet school is that they also don't have a veterinary teaching hospital, right? So you're either teaching or you're not. And so, so for me, it was difficult because I was teaching, but not in the vet program, because I was launching a master's of veterinary education program. And so there was sort of that strange space in there. But I also think in some ways they've gone completely the other direction, and they've made it too easy to get promoted, and they've made it too easy to get.
Oh,
so So their sort of tenure was a multi-year appointment. So you were on a year-to-year contract there,
Right.
but then if you could apply for a multi-year appointment, you would get like a 3 or 5 year contract, and that was basically your tenure. And not to say that, that happened a lot, but there were certainly some situations where I was like, oh, okay, right?
Oh yeah, no, there are also institutions that the line is the level for promotion and tenure is so high you might trip over it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
Are you showing up? Are you a warm body?
Right.
Great, you'll
Yeah.
go through.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, like, my first institution, which was public health, I took a non-tenure track line intentionally because, like Bobby, I knew that my research wasn't going to align with what they were looking for. I wasn't going to get NIH grants to, investigate qualitatively how I could improve teacher quality. That just wasn't going to happen. And it was very clear that and I did get promoted there to associate based on the strength of my teaching and my service, which was great, but it was still very clear that I was a second class citizen because I was an associate professor, non-tenure and non-tenure track. And it was very clear that, yes, you're great in the classroom, but you're really not as valuable as somebody who's bringing money in. So it's very interesting how very different it is. But I mean, if I had my druthers, I would be at an institution that was primarily teaching and provided that opportunity, because obviously that's what I love to do, and education's my thing. But so what was your experience there?
Very, very low promotion tenure criteria, as long as you're not a monster, you'll pretty much go through. And they did value teaching publications, in that regard. So I think there are some institutions that, from my point of view, the ones that are like really teaching heavy, which tend to be the small private ones that the teaching is more valued. And I think there are some institutions that have realized that the ivory tower is not how veterinary medicine is going to go forward, and they're like, whatever you want to do, we'll support you, and make no distinction between clinical track and tenure track. It's just like for the university's system, of accounting, and that the salaries are the same. And then there's some institutions that are still like, no, if you're a full tenure track professor, you are a better human being than if you are not.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will say I've gone through the tenure process 3 times at 3 different institutions.
Wow.
Because most places, well, I don't know, most places, the places I've gone will not honor tenure somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty common.
Because they want you to demonstrate that you're a reasonable freaking human being there, which I think I can get behind that,
Yeah.
Well, and also, but like the way modern tenure is, like, okay, you paid your dues. Like, well, you didn't pay them to us.
Right. Yeah. What have you done for me lately?
Yeah. And so it's funny, the PNT dossier, Bobby, I actually kind of like doing like my yearly, review. Like I like compiling all that data and like, oh, look what I did this year. And like for the PNT dossier, it's like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff I've done. Like, it's fun for me.
Oh, you know what I wanted? I wanted my so every year we do our annual evaluation, and I don't mind that. It is good. And sometimes like, oh crud, I got to add that to my CV. I've totally forgot I did that. So like it is good to do that. But like for my P&T dossier, what I wanted to do was get all of those and staple them together. And instead I had to take a creative writing course so that I could weave this together with a golden thread. So I was like, well, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, the P&T process for me was pretty intense. I mean, I ended up with like a 35-page dossier or something like that. That was ridiculous. And then, so the other thing I want to ask you too about is this whole process of getting external reviewers to look at your packet, but you can't know them. They can't know you. You can't have ever worked with them. And so for example, when I was going up for P&T or for promotion, I was like, I literally don't know anybody that would be able to review this because
I know that
I don't, right? Like, I don't know anybody that I don't know that could review this, because if I send it to a traditional reviewer, they're going to be like, no way this person is going to get tenure or promoted. Right.
Yep.
And so I was like, listen, I can provide you 3 names, but those 3 names are people that, I mean, I don't know them. They're not buddies. We don't go drinking together. We haven't done papers together. We haven't done research, but they know who I am because that's the world we live in. And so I was able to get through on that, but I'm curious what your all's experiences with that and what you feel like that process is.
So
like
the places where I've been where this has come up, the directive is not that you don't know them or that they don't know your name, but like you said, like you haven't done a paper with them and gone drinking with them and, like those kinds of things. But like, there are people that I've been on committees with that, or like that I interviewed, for a position and like those kinds of things that I would write letters for. I thought you were going to talk about from my point of view, the problem with the external letters is that they're almost always laudatory.
Oh,
right?
yeah, that too.
And so like, is the system really providing a check? I think in all the letters I've written, there was one that I was like, yeah, this person wouldn't get, promoted where I am.
It's really interesting. And it kind of circles back to what we were saying at the beginning. Every school has a different system.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a request to be an external reviewer. I actually have one in my inbox right now that I need to reply to. But I had one a while back, and they sent me the dossier, and I'm like looking through this, and I was thinking the same. I was like, any of the places I've been, I don't think this person would get promoted. So I was like, can you send me your guidelines? Because I don't want to based on my whole thing, but I was just kind of I've had
and they should do that. Like that's a newbie error to me. Like I don't know who sent you that email, but that needs to be part of that email.
Yeah.
Well, and that had been my experience prior, that they were like, and here's our stuff, and you can go through this. I was like, hey, I feel like I'm missing some things, and they sort of kind of gave me. I was actually pretty disappointed in what they sent me, and that was the hardest one I've had to do. One, because the candidate was. Again, like based on their criteria, I'm like, I'm not sure that there is evidence to support this. Now, that's not true, but like what has been provided for me, but based on the materials I got, I'm like, did this person get any help with this either? So,
oh God, I hate to interrupt, but that brings up a really important point, which is that teaching information is almost never provided.
And it's
external letters.
Yeah. The other thing that's really hard too, and I'll let you get back to your comment, Bobby, but is I think we need to talk about how do you evaluate teaching and how do you evaluate whether or not it's quality teaching versus just showing up, right? So
and what I ended up writing in my summary letter was like, these are things that happened, but I have no way to comment on whether or not this was done well. Person is clearly like, here are some other things you gave me, and okay, that's cool. But I can't evaluate this if that's what you're asking for me. There's nothing that has been provided. No teaching evaluations, nothing from students, nothing from peers. It was just like they taught in these courses. I'm like, I don't even know if they showed up. Like there's not even an attendance record. So that was really, really tough. Because based on their own criteria, which again, I don't know, every school, I'm kind of like, I think my letter is just a box that's being checked. I'm not even sure anyone's going to read it, but it's really tough because you do want to support folks, right? Like you don't want to be the reason that somebody doesn't get promoted, but at the same time,
I'm okay with that.
Well, I don't want to.
Someone has to be a gatekeeper. We got to fail students, right? Or not continue them on if we believe competency based. You know, like we need to be gatekeepers on a certain level, I believe.
I just don't want to. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I did. I was like, I feel icky about this,
Yeah.
you know, because this isn't somebody that I know personally. And I also know how hard things have been in the last few years. And I know what it's like to be on clinics most of the time and like all the time on ER and being asked to be pulled in all these different directions and then be like, oh, also, by the way, you have to do all these other things and then get judged on it. And so it was just, it was really, really hard. And because it wasn't somebody I knew.
Yeah.
And, anyway, yeah.
I can see that. You know, the thing though is that when you go up for something like that, number one, there sounds like there were several failures along the way from individuals who were mentoring that person who should have been supporting that person, because clearly that packet was not appropriately put together.
Yeah.
But secondly, if you feel like that and you don't ask for that help, then it makes it, it's on you, right? Like, I mean, I was thinking that I was going to get promoted based on the strength of my teaching. And so I included evidence of that, right? So I included comments from students, I included evaluations, included comments from evaluations, I included external peer reviews, you know, all those things that indicated that, yes, I actually had done these things. I had evidence to support that. And, you know, did I cherry pick the things? Yes, of course I did. Because I'm not going to.
Of course you did.
I had a student who told me I sucked.
Right.
But that's the process, and that's the game that you
process.
have to play. And so it's the same thing with like our expert educator and distinguished expert cohort.
yeah.
Right? And so people are like, well, how come this person? I had a little bit of a sketchy conversation with somebody who was a little bit annoyed that several people that they felt should have been identified as distinguished experts were not identified as distinguished experts. And it was like, listen, we gave individuals the rubric that we were going to use. And it was pretty clear when we were going through this. Of course, I didn't look at all of them, but there were some as a group where we were like, clearly this individual at least knows enough to use the rubric to respond to the prompt that is asked and outlines, you know, in large groups or small groups, this is how I meet the criteria for this. This is how I meet the criteria for this. And frankly, if you can't even do that, then you're probably not an expert educator, right? And so we had to have that conversation. So I think providing some guidance, but it sounds like the one that you dealt with was just, there were some failures on a number of levels.
So many
and
levels.
But
Well,
part
and
of
it
the problem
also-
too is
the-
what is
the-
the teaching assessment? Like what
Yeah. So I think that what I wanted to say about that is that it reinforces the idea that research is the most important thing,
Mhm.
and teaching and service are like, okay, yeah, obviously do that. You know, like the fact that when I get a letter request that the teaching information is not at least as significant amount of data that I evaluate when I'm writing this letter as everything else, like that tells you like system wide where we put our emphasis, which is a problem.
And also we don't want it to be a throwaway thing, right? Like I know it feels icky, and I appreciate, and I would be the same way. I would feel icky about it, but I would be like, no, I need to hold to the standard, right? It's the same thing when I'm reading a qualitative paper and I'm like, no, I'm going to hold the line on this standard. There's a standard for high quality research and qualitative methods, and this is not meeting it. Because if I don't do it, then maybe one more paper is going to get published that's crappy. One more person's going to get promoted that indicates that, oh, we don't really value teaching. You just have to check the box and you'll get promoted, right? So
I agree. And like my letter was lukewarm. I mean, there were certain things that I was like, here, these things were clearly very good. These things I can't evaluate at all. And so I'm concerned about this. And then these things are like, you know, if you're talking about based on these standards, like this is, you know, so my language wasn't like, this person's terrible, you should fire them. But it was like, based on what I'm seeing, based on what I was provided, this is my assessment.
I mean, that's all you can do.
And yeah, I mean, I still was just like, oh, I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't follow up
well,
on it.
So then that's the other thing that I think, Catherine, you mentioned is, you know, sometimes people are not successful for P&T or promotion. And I see it as in martial arts, when I put someone up for a black belt test, they are going to pass.
Right.
Because I evaluated them, I tested them. I'm not going to put someone up who I'm like, maybe they'll be okay. You know what I mean? Like that, like it's nonsensical. Why would you do that?
Yeah. You know, it's sort of, it goes back. So when I was getting ready to do my dissertation defense, I was talking to my to my major professor. And I scheduled my defense for 8:00 in the morning because I figured not very many people would want to come to an 8:00 in the morning defense. And like, I could do all these things. It's like one of 3 times in my entire life where I had like those anxiety school dreams or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to her the day of, and in my head, I'm like, she's not gonna allow me to go defend my dissertation if she thinks I'm going to fail. Right. Like if there's even like a 1% chance that she thinks I'm going to fail, there's just there's no reason for her to do that to herself or to me or to the program. It doesn't make sense. Like I know this in my head.
Gosh.
And so I go up to her, and her name's Molly. And I said, I, did all my prep, and it's like 7:45. We were just waiting for people to show up so I could get started. And we were walking, leaving the room. And she says to me, well, do you have any questions? And I was like, well, I just have one request. And she's like, okay. And I said, if you're going to fail me, just please just do it privately. Like, don't do it in front of everybody. She looks at me and she's like, sure, Catherine, no problem. And she like turns around and walks out. I was like, well, what does that mean? Right. But she's just like, that's the most ridiculous thing for anybody to say, because I'm not going to put you in front of people to do this major thing in your life unless you're prepared to pass.
But it is interesting. That is a little different than other things, right? Here, you're going to take this exam and you're going to study really hard, and that's fine, but you may not pass, and that's not the end of the world. You try again. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, something Erica just said about, like you're not going to let somebody go up there. I'm assuming most other places, everywhere I have been, has had here's like a pre-promotion. Let's put your packet through like a skimming, and we're going to go through and give you some feedback. Because I know at Florida, like it was, and I had some colleagues who like were going to go up for promotion, and they were told like, nah, you probably shouldn't do that this year. Like do these things and beef it up, because they don't want you to go through that. And I feel like at Florida, the college level P&T committee was way harsher than the university level. They were like, if we get it out of the college, we want you to pass at the university level.
Makes sense.
I thought it was actually great. I learned about some of this stuff after. So the year I went up for promotion, they like make an announcement of all the people who get promoted, not just at the vet school, but like, everywhere. And there were like 4 or 5 people at the med school across the street who didn't get their promotion. And I was, that is sort of surprising to me. And it just makes me like, as rigorous as the college level process was, I was sort of grateful for it. Because we're like, our bar is higher than the university bar. We don't want you to go through all of this, and that so that was good. I also had like my department head there was super supportive and really helpful in the game that you kind of have to play. Cause they were like, no, you can't just staple all of your annual reports. But
you want to, but no.
I really wanted to. My favorite comment. Okay, I have to share this because this is my favorite. So they go through the committee, like in the preliminary thing, and give you feedback. And again, I am so grateful for this feedback because I was able to go through. But one of the people, and I have no idea who it was anonymous, but basically, their comments on my packet was like, Dr. Connor has been like impressively productive. She's, really done really well, but her promotion packet reads like a list of accomplishments. And I'm like, I am so confused about what supposed to be. And this was, I was like, we need to weave. And again, this was at the phrase, like, we need to weave the golden thread to tell the story of, and I was like, seriously? Yeah. It just really reads like a list of accomplishments. I'm like, that's what I was going for.
So a lot of institutions will do a 3-year review.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, at your 3rd year, are you on track? Good. Keep doing what you're doing. If you're not on track, specifically write, this is what you need to do. And then if you do it, you pass. And it's just like good teaching, right? It's like give specific feedback about what the student needs to do to pass. And if they do it, they pass.
Yeah. And I had that, and people had given me that. They're saying, this is good. Maybe try to get this. But there was nothing about style points in the pre-review. Right. There was about like your creative writing skills or anything it was like a quick skim, and I understand they have a lot of things to go through, but I didn't have a sense for the narrative that they were looking. And again, that may have been college levels, a specific thing that over time people had gotten, were like, hey, this is working. Let's just keep way. But that the whole system just kind of cracked me up. And I was like, one day I want to go and blow this up. I want to go and tell people, just staple your annual reports.
Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit bizarre, right? Because again, you don't necessarily have to give everything. You just cherry pick the things that make you look really good, because why wouldn't you? And so I didn't even go through a 3-year review. I actually went up a year early for promotion, and I was discouraged by my department chair from doing that. And basically, he looked at my packet. I had somebody else look at my packet, and they were like, yeah, I really think you probably would be successful. And so he's like, well, I guess I can give you a lukewarm letter. And I'm like, oh, fantastic. Right. So he sends me the letter, and I'm like, well, if this is your lukewarm letter, I would like to see what your enthusiastic letter was, because it was a really good letter, which, I mean, it turned out, to work out just fine. But there's the other thing, is the gatekeeping of like, well, we don't want you to go up early because that's why would you go? And I'm like, but if I've met the benchmarks, or if I've exceeded the benchmarks, why does it care if I'm here for 2 years or 8 years? Like, just why does it matter? So
an interesting thing.
All those weird unwritten rules that you don't know until you get there.
They're weird. Go ahead, Eric.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to go back to a comment earlier, which is, you get some of these people that are tenured and then just sort of camp, and fully agree that they can poison the well. I don't disagree that there's no recourse for them, because as a department head, you've got a pretty big hammer, which is, what your raise is this year? A big old goose egg. You are going to get no more money until you shape up.
But if you're already making so much money that it doesn't matter.
No. Yeah, if you're a full profit pen, whatever, you can write your own check.
Like, I mean, there were people at my first institution as full professors that were coming in at like $250,000.
Yeah, that's like pen. It's insane.
Yeah, and it's because they were fully tenured and they were full professors, and they literally had to do nothing to earn that, other than say, I'm a fully tenured professor.
Half my salary, but said I didn't have to do anything. I mean, I would personally be okay because I'd be bored, but like. That's a good deal. Like financially, we're not going to give you a raise. You're like, but we'll keep giving you your current paycheck.
Yeah, that's why I mean, even if you're making less than, even if you're not making $250,000 a year, let's say you're making $140,000 a year and you're not getting a raise. I mean, you're still
right. But you can still
it's not great, but it's not nothing. Is my point.
Yeah.
On what you're saying, Eric, like, I think they have a lot more recourse than they utilize, right? Yeah. Like, if is not doing their job, you write up, you're not doing your job. You document that, and you say, you have been warned, here's what you need to do. And even if you have tenure, you can, but it's a lot of work. I mean, and that's not even if you have not just for tenured folks, like, it is kind of hard. You have to document, but you just have to document.
You just document it.
Yep. And you can do a post-tenure review at any time. Right. I mean, it's not like it's a one-time thing and, we're never going to do a post-tenure review.
Right. And we're all on at Georgia and here at year-to-year contracts. So when you said you had multi-year contracts, I'm like, that's what's that like? Because it's like every year I got to sign a thing.
Yeah.
What happens if they don't give me a thing to sign? I don't have a job.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's LMU's version of tenure, is this opportunity to have this multi-year which in some ways is kind of nice, but it's still an at-will state, so they can still fire you. It's not truly tenure, but it's
and that's one of the changes I know some colleges and universities are making, because they're saying everybody who's not tenure has a year-to-year contract, and like, this is super unfair. So they're like, okay, well, instead of tenure, we'll offer you a 3-year contract, which is admittedly better than a 1-year, but it's not a forever contract. So it's still not the same.
But my point is that the tenured faculty are all signing contracts every year.
Yeah. That. I think so great. Yeah. I mean, not you're all signing contracts 1 year, but that you're all the same. I think that is a really good thing. I think, again, places are trying, and I have been part of, institutions that are like, okay, we need to look at our P&T process and we need to revamp this. And I appreciate the places that have said, hey, let's not just get tenured professors in on this committee. Let's get people who are in these different tracks and get their perspectives, so that we're looking at things a little bit more globally and making sure we're getting perspectives from people in different tracks, which has, again, so I think there is a movement in a lot of places, recognizing that the old system, it's not even that old, not the new old system, the old new system, whatever, is not perfect, and we can do better by our people. I still, it's
long
still
way to go.
Some work. Yeah, for sure. But
it's nice to see the change in understanding that people who primarily teach bring significant value to, an educational institution. And I mean, so
I mean, just like football coaches bring significant
right. Yes.
contributions.
Of course, that's a whole nother conversation. But
yeah, let me tell you, like modern football coaches, like you don't win 10 out of 11 games one year, you're out.
Yeah, true.
So, but okay, they buy out their contract, they still get paid for 10 more years and whatever.
Yeah. But it is nice to see things moving a little bit forward and saying, hey, our teachers are valuable. Let's figure out how we can assess that and make sure that there's some consistency, at least within intra-institutionally and things like that. So we're seeing it. It's still
though, like at Florida, they had just revamped the teaching portfolio guidelines for the promotion process. And I was the first person to go through that process with those new guidelines. And, it was successful, which was a little scary because you're like, nobody knows what this is. But it was successful. And so like things are, moving, I think, in the right direction. And we have more regional organizations. So you mentioned AVE, but there's also like the regional consortia that are helping to provide opportunities to get like external evaluation and help, guidelines. And here we can review your packets. And so you're definitely seeing a movement. And again, 500 some odd people involved with AVE. Like, guess what? We ain't going anywhere. So you're going to have to start recognizing the contributions that we're making. And that's happening. I definitely feel that I feel supported in the things that I'm pursuing, that they, again, by the people I work with day to day, they are valued. Is it valued at the university level in the state, but honestly, at most colleges of veterinary medicine, the university level doesn't really understand anything about what we do.
They have no idea. They have no idea what we're doing.
About anything, literally anything.
Let us know. Yeah.
I also think that the state of veterinary educational research is somewhat facilitating that, because you can get, good peer-reviewed publications now that show that you're a legitimate researcher.
Yeah.
Good.
And a lot of the discipline journals will accept teaching papers and publish those as well. And so, you could get promoted on the basis of having a national, international reputation in education.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and also this idea that you can have an international and national reputation, but it's not necessarily just based on publications, right? It's other things, including providing mentorship, providing talks, invited talks, submitting things internationally and nationally. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. And there are some small grants that are still available for external granting. And so people, I think, are starting to realize, well, you don't need $100 million to do a veterinary educational research project. You can do a really good project for $2,500 or $5,000, and it should still count, right? Because the bang you get for your buck is significant.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the hard thing. You're like, this $5,000 grant's pretty good, right? Yeah. But the other thing I would say is it's not even just like the publications, but you're like, here, let me describe how I revamped this course. Let me talk through the things that I've done here, and those are valued in a similar way, right? These, like you said, these are the folks that I've mentored, or this is what I've done. So it doesn't have to just be publications to be considered, beneficial or even scholarly work. Which is also, and because that can be happening at the local level. And those were some of the things that I feel like people don't think could be valued. And I think that is, not everybody is understanding that, but I think a lot of people will say, like, if you go through and say, here's what I did, here are the things that I've tried, here are the innovations I've done, or I went to the CE course and then I implemented this in my own teaching. I think those are also valuable things. You just got to figure out how to document it.
Well, that's the real thing, is like, what's the template like for your institution, either for your yearly review or for your promotion and tenure dossier? Does it capture that data? Is there a place for that data? Because that's yet another way that the system can discriminate, and be like, oh yeah, well, okay, you revised this course. Show me on your dossier where that appears.
Yeah.
One thing that Florida, that's why they revamped the teaching. Like now there is a teaching portfolio, and there was room for that kind of information. Now you still have
That's cool.
Yeah, no, it really was. And so there were places for that. It was a little more like open. It could be different things, which I think it has to be, because that we need to make room for, different types of activities. And it wasn't the only thing. It wasn't just like, tell us a story and move on. It was one of the things. I was not involved, obviously, with the developing of that group, but I thought they did a nice job in the redevelopment of the teaching portfolio and looking through the process here at Virginia Tech. Like, it's maybe not as well delineated, but going through that, I'm like, there is a place for me to put this stuff. And it helps that I've gone through the process somewhere else and know, like, I need to include these types of things. So that is helpful. I think somebody who hadn't been through that or doesn't get the mentorship might struggle a little bit in the system the way it is right now, which is probably another important point of like the mentorship going through the promotion process is crucial. So you need to seek out that advice and talk to other people, ask people to share their packets with you. Somebody who's maybe in a similar kind of promotion path is hugely helpful. I know after I went through at Florida and it was successful, they asked, like, can we share? I was like, share that with whoever you want. Yeah. Like, I may have felt differently if I hadn't passed me. Like, can we share this as an example of what I do? But I was like, please, if it can help anybody, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's something that is really important that I know we need to wrap up here in a minute, but certainly I think one of the reasons I was successful when I went up for promotion at my institution was because I had a really good colleague and friend who was like, hey, I just went up for promotion. Do you want to share? Would you like to see my package? I'm like, yes, please. And that, that helped me immensely. So just having that template and knowing that individual had been successful was like super helpful.
I had multiple. I was like, I will take some of yours. And I'll take some of yours. Yeah, it was incredibly helpful.
And I think as much as we probably all agree that tenure as it is not doing what it needs to do for veterinary medicine and veterinary education, I think the biggest difficulty with dismantling it is disciplines where they do have 200 people applying.
Yeah.
Like if you put a tenure track English position up, history, like those are places where the job security is meaningful.
Yeah. Oh, like my friend who's a sociology professor, and they advertised a sociology assistant or associate professor and had like 149 applications in the first 3 days.
Redirect some of those folks into vet med.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's crazy. Well, thanks for sharing, and it was good to get a little more information about the history of tenure. I wasn't too far off with my understanding. So that's good. But yeah, it's still just an interesting thing. It's still part of what we do. But I think that people are finding ways sort of around it to try to, raise the level of fairness for others, which is good. People are getting creative without having to blow up the system. I still want to blow up the system, but I like to blow up systems in my head.
Oh my gosh, me too. All the time.
Yeah. Let's break it down. But, so, advice for folks that are going through this wherever you are is talk to other people at your institution, get advice, get help. There are folks who can help you with that, hopefully. And, but yeah, and we all just need to keep pushing at that, right? So we're not going to really be able to blow it up likely. It's going to have to be slow and just chipping away at it, which is happening. And a lot of folks before us have done a lot of good work and just kind of move things along.
Yeah. Great topic. Thanks, Bobby.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks for chatting, y'all. This was a lot of fun. And we'll catch everybody next time.